Thanks very much. I just want to say, welcome everyone. We're obviously really disappointed that we couldn't come to campus. We were sort of planning this a few months ago. And to some extent, what I'm going to talk about today was some of the things that we would have really liked to have shown you had you been on campus. We've not been researching buildings and energy very long. When we compare it against, some of our colleagues here today, we're quite new to the field. But what I really wanted to talk about today was sort of how we sort of approached it, how we thought about it a little bit differently. And I think that's given us a real impetus to sort of grow the research into one of probably the most successful teams at the university. We're probably famous for sort of facilities. We very much focused on lab testing, but and as I'll discuss in a little bit more detail, we approached it slightly differently. So we have 4 facilities, one currently under construction, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of the presentation, but I'll give some detail on that. I think Richard will be talking about it in a bit more detail. So the first one is the Salford Energy House. That's definitely the one that I will be explaining in more detail, because that was very much something that put us on the map about doing something differently. But that's not to say the other laboratories aren't important as well. So we have a UCAS accredited thermal measurement laboratory where we look at insulation, and we also in 2018-19 opened the Smart Meters Smart Homes Lab. And I think some of the conversations we're having today about the relevance of data and the ability to understand data and relate smart meter data to Internet of Things data for things like air source heat pumps has relevance to what we're talking about today. And last of all, obviously that's a render, but we're a lot further on with Energy House 2. So I will just touch on that, but I don't want to steal Richard's thunder later on in the morning. So we actually only really started in around 2009, and we were horizon scanning new areas, looking for problems in the built environment. We'd had a long tradition in Salford of management, of building information modelling, and we were looking to kind of find where were the next areas of research. And the one obviously that was very much in our lap at a local level, we're based in Greater Manchester, but also nationally, was around the decarbonisation of the existing housing stock. And I've got an old policy document there, Warm Homes, Greener Homes, from 2010. I think it's the outgoing Labour government, which suggested combined heat and power as a solution for retrofitting. So it showed that there was obviously a problem there, and we needed to build some expertise. We had good construction management expertise, but we didn't have the building science, and we certainly didn't have some of the things around human factors. So we engaged with the health school and our physics department to kind of try and think slightly differently about how we'll solve this problem, and how we'd engage with the sector and with the research discipline in a new way. So the solution we came up with was the Salford Energy House. So in 2010, 2011, we constructed the building, and this was just before Richard joined us. And we recognised that retrofit was an innovation-led problem. And what we recognised also was that there was a lot of modelling going on. And actually, when we started digging around, sometimes the evidence for whether things worked or how things worked was not always there. I think the other thing that we wanted to do was be very industry facing and engage in partnership working, so people in the city, social housing providers, but also the businesses that made the products. And so the idea of Energy House 1 came from the physics department, which was to say there was a gap between things being tested at the lab level, so things being bench tested, and field trials, which were at the time very, very difficult. I think anybody who's been involved in field trials knows how difficult they can be. So the idea was that we could test things under controlled conditions. So we built a Victorian end terrace with a next door property using original reclaimed materials and traditional building approaches, and placed it within an environmental chamber. So that allowed us to do several things that were not possible at the time in terms of research. So the first thing was, it was a whole system, it was a whole house. So we could see how products not only worked independently on a bench, but how they worked together. So if we look at the testing we do in the thermal laboratory, it's a metre squared of insulation. Actually, what we had an opportunity to do here was to see how they fitted together as a whole system. So the details, you know, we're aware that that's where the devil is in particular around retrofit. I think the second opportunity obviously it gave us was repeatability. So controlling the environmental conditions, we could go down to -13 up to +30 and put limited additional things like rain, solar heat and snow and wind onto the surfaces. But it allowed us to look at how things would operate with and without a particular intervention, and that was incredibly valuable. I mean, the one thing that we do realise about field trials is they take a long time because there is so much noise. You need a lot of data, and there is no guarantee that you're not going to have a very mild winter that may not give you the data that you want. The third thing is granularity, so very much about the amount of data we could collect. When we do field trials, you know, you may have 12, 14, if you're feeling very expensive, 20 points of data, but within the energy house we were able to hardwire in over 250 sensors, and at some points we've had more than 350 sensors on the property at any one time, and that gives you a level of detail that is just not possible with field trials. I think the final issue is flexibility, the ability to tear it up, break it up, put something in, take something out, put something different in, compare and contrast. It gave us that kind of freedom that is very difficult to get in the field. So it allowed us to compare and contrast different products, do short tests of things we were interested in. We had a huge amount of flexibility. It's been an incredibly useful facility for us. So I think one of the first sort of major projects we did was the Saint-Gobain whole house retrofit. We're just currently in the middle of a whole house retrofit at the moment with bays, and that's working with some of the people here today. So Dave Allenson from Loughborough and Leeds Beckett. So this product was really about bringing Saint-Gobain's product family together into a single solution. And so over a period of around 6 months, we engaged in a full retrofit, which was external wall insulation on the gable end and the rear, internal wall insulation on the front. It was loft insulation, a floor membrane, and high performing doors and windows. But what we did here was we obviously baselined the property, then completely retrofit the property and took one thing off at a time. And there was an attempt to do this actually in the field a few years before in a project called Calibre, and obviously the weather kind of confounded that a little bit. This allowed us to do the same repeatable tests over and over again and to see what the impact of individual interventions were. We did additional work, we did further retrofit works over the previous years, and I think what was interesting to us, and I think what this demonstrated, was the power of this method. And so really from this point, we were never really short of work ever again. We always had a project in there, and sometimes we had waiting lists of a year, which gave gave us an indication that obviously not only is it useful for grant-funded research and academic research, but the industry felt value in allowing us to help engage with their innovation cycle and shortening that innovation cycle quite considerably in some cases. So we did a lot of stuff. We can see here that we looked at characterising the suspended timber floors. We've done work with smart vehicle to grid. Some everyday products such as thermostats. We did significant work with an organisation in the UK called Beamer, who represent the product manufacturers. I think we did sort of 5 or 6 rounds of testing with them on their control systems. We recently did a project called Haven, which was really looking at integrating smart energy systems. So a Tesla battery, a vehicle to grid charger, a heat pump, a smart hot water tank, and seeing how they all work together. And that project for me demonstrates just how quickly we were able to build a demonstrator because we had the existing system, but then also have that demonstrator under controlled conditions. And it was something that would not have been possible in the field. It really wouldn't. We had a lot of the equipment already. And so over the years, I think we've done everything, every product, every retrofit product that could be included into a house. And I think the other things which we really didn't understand when we first started, and it's very much the area of work that Richard has led, is the ability to engage with new building test methods. So we've done things obviously around the Annex, but also things with quantitative thermography and other different types of tests. So for us, it's been a really useful way of engaging with other academic institutions and industry partners who are looking to understand what building performance methods will be there and available in the future. So this kind of leaves us to where we are now, and we're seeing, I suppose, both Richard and I are engaging with some large developers at the moment to see what we think the future is going to look like, what's bearing down. And for us, decarbonisation is still there, but adaptation and mitigation are both kind of hand in hand. And what does the built environment need to do to respond to that? And I think what we're seeing is, the increase in modern methods of construction, so more off-site, both for retrofit and for new build. In the UK, we're talking about Part Z of the building regulations, so the embodied and life cycle carbon emissions of a building. So that brings us to low impact materials. Energy systems transitions, so houses are no longer, dumb nodes that just consume, they're storing energy, generating energy and trading energy, so that makes something more complicated, and obviously the inclusion of EV. I think there's a real interest in real performance, which I think why today is so valuable, and also I think hand in hand with that is the issue of digitization and Internet of Things. So all of these things create pressures for the industry to operate differently and learn new things, and also pressures for academia to make sure that we understand what we're doing when we adopt these new approaches to delivering retrofit and new build housing. So this kind of left us with a query. We saw these things coming in and thought, how do we respond to that? And we have done that in some ways, particularly around digitization and Internet of Things. But actually the Energy House left us with limitations, and in a meeting in late 2015, Richard and I sat down and said, what would we like to do with Energy House if we could? And what we realised is we had a fixed UK archetype, and we had quite often international companies coming in and saying, yeah, we really like the idea, but we don't have any of these types of houses. So that limited us to a very specific way of working in certain areas. The environmental conditions were limited, very Northern European, so not a big proportion of the world's environmental conditions. The fact it's built on a concrete plinth, there were things that were not being replicated there that we had to take account of. We weren't allowed to make permanent changes. We made a decision that if we couldn't get it back to its original state, we couldn't make those interventions. So things like coatings, anything that basically we couldn't unpick. For those of you who've been to the Energy House, lack of access and limited space, really it's a very small chamber, and it's very difficult to tour people around it in any kind of numbers. And we do get a lot of visitors. I think we probably had about 3 or 4 government ministers and a minor member of the royal family. So we do have that interest in visiting. And I think the last thing is it was products only. We had an ambition to do whole houses. So I won't steal Richard's thunder, because obviously he's got some video and more detail, but this is where it took us to. These are fairly recent photographs of the facility. And Energy House 2 lets us address a lot of those limitations. So we're able to build whole buildings in there. There's room for in each chamber for 2 complete buildings, and there's 2 chambers. We have broader environmental conditions. And so really we see very much for Salford that this is a continuation of something that we felt was quite innovative 10 years ago, and the demand that we've had from the sector actually really justifies this investment, which is around 16.25 million. So not wanting to take up any more of your time, thanks very much for inviting me to come and speak with you today, and I hope you have a really enjoyable day, and I look forward to meeting some of you physically when we get a chance to. Thank you very much.